Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Parkway Speakers Series. Our guest today is a good friend and member of the Missouri Bar. Her name is Nina Sykora, and Nina and I worked together in the Public Defender's Office for a number of years. She was a trial attorney. Now she's employed by a big-time downtown law firm, Brown and James, and she's a senior associate there. And so instead of being in the criminal side of things, she's on the civil side of things. So we're going to hear about Nina's time as a public defender. And she also, I think, will have some words to say about women in the legal profession.
Yes.
So we'll look forward to that as well. Quickly, let me tell you a few things about Nina that show that she's a wonderful person and a great lawyer. Mary Fox was her boss at the Public Defender's Office in the city of St. Louis. Mary's a tough grader.
She is.
And she happened to mention one time when I was talking about Nina, she said, you know, she's one of our best. And that is indeed high praise. Mary is now head of the entire public defender offices statewide. So this is high praise. And recently, Nina was named chairperson of the criminal law section of the Bar Association. And then the other thing that I like about Nina is she truly was a leader among her peers at the public defender's office, and I saw that most of the time in the lunchroom. When Nina would offer something, people would get quiet and they would listen. So I'm pleased that she can be with us here today. We're going to do this a little differently, and that is we're going to do a Q&A, and I will serve as the moderator. And my only thing that I'll commit to is that I will try to do as good a job moderating as Chris Wallace did. So I hope that's not too high a standard. In any event, welcome, Nina. It's good to have you with us. We look forward to your presentation. And I will ask the first question, which is, where did you go to high school?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm super honored to be here. I went to high school at Ursuline Academy here in Kirkwood.
Very good.
I am actually still involved in the Ursuline community, and if anyone is involved in the Ursuline community here or watching, I am currently the coach for their mock trial team,
Very
which
good.
has been very exciting.
More volunteer work.
Yes, that's, Ursuline's motto is Serviam, and you are, you do a lot of volunteer work while you're there, and I feel like that has really carried over into my life.
I'm sure it has.
Yeah.
Most notably with respect to your work as a public defender.
That's definitely in the words of my mom, I became a public defender because I had that foundation of Serviam in my teenage years.
I'm sure you did.
Yeah.
And so is that what motivated you to take a job with the Missouri Public Defender?
It's not, or maybe it is subconsciously, but I actually during law school started to clerk for a Judge Higgins up in Cook County, so that's Chicago. And I was in her criminal division. I was working, writing opinions for her, watching jury trials, and I was most involved in her WINGS program, which was a rehabilitative program for women who worked in the sex industry, and they wanted to improve their lives. These women would be charged with some sort of felony or misdemeanor charge. They'd come into the program, and these women, they went to high school, they went to college, they opened up their own shops. It was amazing to see. So throughout my time there, I decided that I wanted to be a public defender. And when I moved back to St. Louis after law school, that was my goal, was to go to the public defender's office.
And you went to work in the City of St. Louis office?
I did.
Is there something unique about the City of St. Louis office versus the other offices in the state of Missouri?
Well, I feel like every office would say this about themselves, but I personally felt that the camaraderie in the city office was unbelievable. Everyone was so friendly. We ate lunch together every day in the lunchroom. We went to lunch at least a couple times a week. We would go to karaoke or happy hour. Everyone was very inclusive, and everyone wanted to help and make you feel welcome.
Wonderful. So tell us what public defenders do.
Public defenders defend the public.
Right. How obvious.
Yeah.
Why didn't I think of that?
So a public defender actually is appointed by the court in cases when somebody cannot hire an attorney to represent them on criminal charges. brought by the state of Missouri.
And those are felony cases?
Felony and misdemeanor. It has to be a certain level of misdemeanor for you to qualify. But when I came into the office was in extreme need of new attorneys, and I was landed mostly with felony cases. I only worked a little bit of misdemeanor, so I don't think I technically have the knowledge to sit here and say what misdemeanors qualified and what didn't. Because the day I arrived at my job, they said, "Oh my gosh, we're so glad you're here. There's 13 felony cases on your desk. Good luck."
Great, and then what did you do with those 13 felony cases?
I think I stared at them for the first few hours.
I'll bet.
I had some questions. I went into another attorney's office, and I think I just asked him, what do I do first? And he's like, "You should probably read them first."
Very good advice.
Which was very good advice.
Is this a sink or swim situation?
Absolutely. So that's one thing that you constantly hear, especially in the media, is that public defenders are overworked and underpaid, and they are not kidding. You walk in and you are in survival mode. So there was days where I would run around constantly putting out fires all day long and not get one substantive thing done. You are working in survival mode. Whatever is the most pressing issue at that time will probably start your day, and then from there, more pressing issues just pop up. I took a lot of work home in the evening so that I could actually read the evidence that the state would claim they had against my client, because there wasn't time during the workday to do that.
I recall Mary Fox once telling me that being a public defender is not right for everybody.
Right.
And I took that to mean stress. You've got to think on your feet.
Yes.
You can't be motivated to be perfect in your preparation.
Yes.
It's just not possible.
It's not possible, and it's not for everyone. There was a lot of crying in my car. Especially, I actually worked towards the last year that I was at the public defender's office. I worked a lot in the juvenile division. I really loved working with the kids. I really loved having that interaction. You really feel like you make a difference when you're sitting with these kids and you're talking to them about what to do next. And it was sometimes so heartbreaking that when I would leave the juvenile justice center, I would just sit in my car and cry. It is so emotionally draining to be a public defender, to run around all day, to have to be on your feet and to think on your feet constantly, and then to also have to carry around those feelings and that sympathy and that empathy for those other human beings that are in jail. It's a very stressful job.
Did you get an opportunity to try jury trials?
I did. My first year there, I tried 7 jury trials. My second year there, I tried, it was either 4 or 5, I can't remember off the top of my head, and that doesn't include the juvenile trials because juveniles don't have jury trials, it's just with a judge.
Do you have memories of the first jury case you tried?
I will never forget the first jury case I tried. It was actually a misdemeanor, and it was also the prosecutor, who I am still very good friends with to this day. It was her first jury trial too. And I remember she was like, "I really think we should just postpone this trial." She wasn't ready. She had cold feet. I had cold feet. And I finally was like, "We have to rip the Band-Aid off. We have to just go do it." And we did. We went and did it. I think I blacked out during voir dire. I don't remember how it went. I was told afterwards that I did a pretty good job. So that made me feel pretty good. But overall, the case was about an assault. It was a 5-person girl fight between 5 women, and my client was pegged as the perpetrator or the starter of the fight. It was interesting, and we saw the attitudes of all the women as they testified and how upset they were over this fight and how it was still carrying into their personal lives, but ultimately we got them not guilty in the case.
Good for you.
Yeah.
High drama, no doubt.
High drama. I think high drama all around in the courtroom.
You mentioned the 2 words, voir dire. What is that, please?
So voir dire is the first step that the jury is involved in. The jury will come to the courtroom and we stand up, we speak to the jury panel members. We ask them questions. We ask them questions based on their personal history, to see if they are a good fit for this jury. It depends on the type of case you're trying. Voir dire can last anywhere from 2 hours to 2 days.
And the goal is to find a jury that can be fair and impartial,
Absolutely.
or more importantly, can be helpful to your client.
Right. So you're always looking for the people that you think will vote more in favor of your client, but ultimately you don't want anyone on the jury that will vote against your client.
What do you think about juries generally? Is it a good system? Is it broken? Is it ridiculous? Should we have judges instead of juries?
It's a very complicated question. I've thought about that a lot. There's been times where I've walked out of the courtroom and have thought to myself, this is the best system in the world. The jury did the right thing. And there's been times where I've walked out of the courtroom and I have said that I don't think the jury really did the right thing here. You see both sides. I've had jury members come up to me after their jury service that have said, you did such a good job, can I give your client a hug for what they had to go through? But then I've had jury members ask me why fingerprints on the bag of drugs weren't analyzed like they see in CSI. You get both parts of the spectrum. I think the jury is there and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. You are presenting the evidence to the community, and I want to believe and have faith that juries are making the correct decisions.
So, of those cases that you tried before a jury, other than the first misdemeanor case you tried, do any of them stick out as being particularly memorable, especially ones involving more serious charges?
Yeah, actually, I think my most memorable case was actually the last case I tried as a public defender. It was a homicide case. It was an involuntary manslaughter charge, which was very interesting because my client was acting in self-defense, and that is the evidence that we put on at the trial. However, the law in the state of Missouri does not allow for a defense of self-defense to an involuntary manslaughter charge. And the facts of the case were that my client's uncle had a history of being aggressive and threatening to hurt or kill my client or other family members. On this particular day, he exhibited those traits, and my client believed that in that moment his uncle was going to kill him, and he shot and killed his uncle. There was no other witnesses to the case except for my client and his uncle. It really was more of a one-sided case, and he testified that he acted in self-defense. Like I said, the law in the state of Missouri says that an involuntary manslaughter really is more of a charge for something you would see in more of a drunk driving accident. But here it was charged in a shooting. And so my client and I had to have a discussion about he would have to take this stand and say that this wasn't an accident, that he really meant to shoot his client, or excuse me, his uncle. And he had the mens rea to do that, and to have that discussion with him to say that you are going to testify under oath to something that is more serious than what you're charged with is a very big deal. And he testified to it and testified to the self-defense, and the jury within 45 minutes found him not guilty.
I think that might have had something to do with his advocate.
I would hope so.
It's fun to win, isn't it?
It is fun to win. But I think the more fun part is standing up there and representing human beings. You are never going to feel that type of passion anywhere else, I believe. That's just my opinion. In the law field, than you are standing next to a human being and fighting for their life.
Do you miss it?
Every day. I actually dream about it constantly, that I'm actually reapplying to go back to the public defender's office. I think it was the best 2 years of my career. Yeah.
Would you ever want to be a prosecutor?
So I've actually thought about this a lot. And, you know, I'm engaged to a former prosecutor, so I obviously don't have any qualms against prosecutors. But I've thought about it, and I do truly believe that anyone who becomes a prosecutor believes that they're also fighting for the community. And a lot of the times, the victims that prosecutors are representing are also the same population that public defenders represent. And so I notice that both sides are fighting for the community. So I don't have anything, I guess, against prosecutors, but I think at this point in my career I wouldn't apply to be a prosecutor. It has nothing to do with my public defender experience, though.
So let's turn a little bit to a civics lesson for
Sure.
our viewers. Tell me the difference between a grand jury proceeding and a preliminary hearing during the criminal justice process.
Sure. So you hear a lot about grand jury proceedings in the news, and I think a lot of people are confused between a jury trial and a grand jury proceeding. But both preliminary hearings and grand jury proceedings are a way to find whether or not an arrest was made with probable cause. In a preliminary hearing, the judge makes that determination. A police officer will come in and testify. The prosecutor will be present. The defense attorney will be present. The defendant, the public defender's client, will be present. They will hear the evidence against them, and the judge will determine whether or not an arrest was valid, whether or not that police officer had probable cause, which is the standard in the state of Missouri and across the United States, to arrest the defendant. In a grand jury proceeding, the standard is still probable cause, but instead of a judge hearing the evidence, the grand jury hears it. And the grand jury comes to a conclusion of whether or not there was probable cause for an arrest that led to the charges.
When your client's case comes before a grand jury, are you allowed to be there?
I'm not allowed to be there. They are secret proceedings, but yeah, they're secret proceedings. I don't think I can elaborate on that.
No, I'm sure. So what do you like better in terms of defending your client? Preliminary hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. For the preliminary hearing, I mean, you can have more success, especially in a lower level felony or misdemeanor case. I guess there is not a preliminary hearing for a misdemeanor case, so excuse me there. But for a lower level felony, I did have luck in a few preliminary hearings arguing that there wasn't probable cause, and the judge found that. And so they kicked the case. My client was released from jail.
At least you have an opportunity to see some of the prosecutor's case.
Right.
So that's helpful.
Yes, so when they present to the grand jury, you don't know what type of evidence they have, and grand juries are typically used in more serious offenses. You don't see it so much in like a drug or trespassing, car accident, DWI type of case.
I know you'll be modest about this, but tell me about how your skills as a cross-examiner developed during those 2 years.
Oh, cross-examination. When you're cross-examining someone for the first time, you have no clue what you're doing. It is so difficult to nail a person down to just a yes or no question. And for the viewers, a cross-examination question is a yes or no question. It is not open-ended. The goal is that they cannot give an explanation to explain away the yes or the no. So you really don't know what you're doing. I will say that the Missouri State Public Defender System, it is a statewide system, sends all of their attorneys to training to learn how to properly cross-examine and to properly try cases, pick juries, do all of that. But there is an art to cross-examination, and I do think that my experience in cross-examination grew throughout those 2 years, but I still don't think it's perfect. I have a lot more growing to do.
I still think that I'm a mess when it comes to cross-examination, but
Yeah.
it's tough. It is indeed. Let's talk a little bit about something that can drive the public crazy, and that is when a judge doesn't allow evidence in and suppresses it because of a constitutional violation.
Sure.
Tell us about that particular aspect of a criminal trial.
So that is actually a really interesting aspect. And as a young attorney, you don't actually think to look. You're a little bit more overwhelmed with the charges and the evidence, and you don't ever stop yourself too much to say, how was this evidence obtained by that police officer? Was it obtained legally? And so those questions kind of come to you a little bit later in your practice. And I know towards the end of my time at the public defender's office, I started filing a lot of what's called motions to suppress. And so I was taking up before trial a motion to suppress evidence or suppress a statement. Statements are also evidence. where a judge could determine that whether or not the police legally obtained that. And so when the judge rules that it wasn't legally obtained, sometimes a case is just flat out dismissed, or we still go to trial and certain evidence then cannot come into trial.
Does that process also apply to confessions or statements made by a defendant?
Absolutely. I think anytime a confession or statement made by the defendant is made, a defense attorney always files for a motion to suppress. It is rare to see that statement or that confession not come in at trial.
Is your client going to testify in a motion to suppress typically?
You know, typically I was always a big advocate, and every attorney's different, that I do want my client to testify to the best of their ability to what happened. I had the best luck getting favorable verdicts when my client testified, whether it was to a motion to suppress or during trial. I think I did have success winning a motion to suppress when my client did not testify, and I had success winning a motion to suppress when my client did testify. It can go both ways. It depends on the type of case and the evidence, and ultimately it's up to your client if they want to testify.
That's a big decision, isn't it?
It's a very big decision, and it's one that should be taken seriously. To remain silent is a right that a defendant has in a criminal trial, and to take away that right or waive that right is a big deal.
During jury selection, how did you try to deal with the notion that perhaps jurors had that if your client doesn't testify, he's guilty? How do you take the poison out of that possibility?
You ask them. You ask them and you watch very carefully at their reactions. A lot of people will nod along and agree with you. A lot of people will right away be like, oh no, he's guilty. And those are the people that you don't want on your jury. So it's kind of tough because a lot of people during jury selection actually stay silent and you don't know. And the best you can do is call them out for staying silent and ask them if they can be fair and impartial or if they have any opinions about anything that was talked about during jury selection. But you would hope that the people who are really opinionated did state their opinions. And for the most part, I observe that jurors love to air grievances during jury selection. They love to state how much they love police. They love to state how much they hate police. They love to state every single interaction they've ever had with a police officer. So usually by the end of jury selection, you do have a good idea of what that person believes and who is going to be fair and impartial.
So at the conclusion of voir dire, the jury selection, what do you do? How do you get rid of certain jurors that you don't want, or prospective jurors?
Sure, so each side is allowed strikes. And because I'm a little nervous sitting here, I can't remember off the top of my head how many strikes it is. And it's different for misdemeanors versus felony trials. You're allowed so many strikes. If the other side, or if the prosecutor thought that my strike was not fair, that person didn't make some outrageous statement, and that's why I'm striking them, they can then challenge my strike. And then ultimately we go up to the judge and we go page by page going over strikes. Some people are stricken for cause because they stood up and then they said some outrageous statement and that they couldn't be fair and impartial, and then the judge will have a strike for that. But all strikes are presented to the court. The court rules, grants them or not, grants them or doesn't grant them, and then from there 12 jurors are picked.
There's a famous Supreme Court case, and I'm going to try to get it right, but is it the Batson case?
Batson challenge.
Batson. And what does that mean in the context of jury selection?
So it means that, let's say I was to strike a juror and the prosecutor's under the impression that I'm striking them on the basis of race and not on the basis of the fact that I don't believe they can be fair and impartial because of something they did during jury selection. They can then raise a Batson challenge, and we have to go to the judge and I have to discuss what they said, what they did, how they acted, and what is the basis of my strike.
Gotcha. Tell us about the economics of surviving on public defender pay. How much were you paid?
So my starting salary was $39,000. I was very lucky that during my first year of being a public defender, I still lived at home with my mom. so I was living rent free. I also put myself through law school. So within a couple months of graduating and getting a job, student loans started becoming due. I had to get a new car because the original car I had broke down, so then I had a car payment. Once I moved out, I had an apartment rent bill. Then you're paying for groceries, you're an attorney, you are in court every day. Not that you have to buy the most expensive clothes, but you have to have some nice presentable suit jackets and some nice suits, especially when you're standing in front of a jury. You still want to go out and see your friends sometimes when you're not too tired from the day. Economically, it was really hard. After my first year, I believe that I got a raise to about 40 or 43,000 maybe. And I believe that's the salary that I left on. I do know that there are raises built in, but for me, the economics of being a public defender and having to pay back my student loans, that was something financially that was weighing on me and actually was one of the biggest reasons for why I wanted to leave.
Who pays your salary?
The state of Missouri pays my salary.
Why does the state of Missouri have to pay for a lawyer for somebody who's charged with a crime?
The United States Constitution provides that every single person has a right to counsel. And whether your client is guilty or not guilty, it doesn't matter. You're standing up there protecting our rights as human beings in this country. And that's something to be proud of.
If they can't afford an attorney, then the court will appoint an attorney.
Yeah.
As the Miranda rights.
Yes.
And then they get that attorney, you, for free.
Yes.
Do you think there's a bias amongst people charged with a crime between public defenders and lawyers in the private practice who charge a fee?
100%.
How so?
I was asked in client visits all the time when I was going to graduate law school, when I was going to become a real attorney was what it was. And I had to explain, I am a real attorney. I went to law school. Like, I've tried this many cases and I'm here to represent you. But the perception among the community is that public defenders aren't real attorneys. A lot of that probably has to do with public defenders are overworked. You can't sit down with someone for hours every month to go over their case with them. You don't have time. There is not time. You have too many cases. There are too many trials. There are too many issues, too many court appearances. You are swimming in case files. I wish I could give every single client the attention that they deserved. And I think sometimes when people are represented by public defenders, they feel like they're not getting that attention. And that's a sad thing. There needs to be more public defenders. There needs to be more incentive to go into public defending to make sure that people get the right representation and the best advocation they can.
What's the mechanism for getting more pay for the public defenders?
The longer you're there.
And does that pay raise, if it goes beyond the pay scale, that has to be an appropriation from the General Assembly, signed by the governor into law?
Right.
Correct?
Yes,
as
that's
part
correct.
of the budget process.
Yes, yes.
And enough said about that.
That's a very political topic. We could go on forever.
Indeed.
Yes.
But you know, the case of Gideon versus Wainwright finally said that if a person is indigent, he or she must have a lawyer provided at the state's cost.
Right.
And that's the essence of the right to counsel,
Yes.
ultimately.
And it goes right into our basic human rights as human beings. That's what we want to protect in this country.
And I want to make a pitch for public defenders. I'm not so sure if I was charged with a crime that I wouldn't want a veteran public defender.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of times that was asked for. Or how old are you? You look like you just graduated. I know I just graduated, but I have fire and passion and I'm going to do my best for you. And that's the best way to spin it. And even despite age, you see that in the civil practice as well, that they would like to see an older, more veteran attorney representing them. And I think that's across the board in terms of being an attorney. Yeah.
I mean, there are some veteran public defenders who have tried hundreds of jury trials.
Yes.
It's remarkable, the experience.
And they're great at their job. And
Indeed.
they love their job. And they want to continue doing their job, and I commend them.
Did you have a and I realize I'm not following the script
It's okay.
in all instances, but you're doing fine.
Yeah.
I remember a public defender named Erica Wurst. Do you know
Yes,
Erica?
I do know Erica.
I suspect you had a similar record, but I remember that she tried 20 cases in a row or something with defendants' verdicts or something astounding.
Yeah, with not guilty verdicts. And it's, you
I mean,
know,
not defendants' verdicts, excuse me.
it's okay. You know, in the city of St. Louis, that's something that is special to the city jurors. They are very defense friendly. They don't want to waste their time on not serious crimes. They live in an area where crime is high, and they want the serious crimes taken care of, but they don't care too much about a felon in possession or a drug possession. And so to get those not guilty verdicts in the city is, I don't want to say it's common, but it is common, and Erica was very good at her job to get 20 in a row like that.
What was your record?
I believe all cases I tried, I got a favorable verdict for the defendant. There was a few where if they were tried with about 5, or if they were charged with 5 felonies, I got 3 of them knocked off. They were found guilty on 2.
And so that's a win.
That's a win. Yeah.
Indeed. So since you've left the public defender, have you tried any jury cases?
I haven't. I have only
How
done.
come?
Well, the pandemic has weighed in on that a little bit. But for the most part, I am now on the civil side of things. To go to trial in a civil case is a much smaller opportunity than it is in a criminal case. A lot of cases settle for a certain amount of money. And on top of that, they take longer. What I've learned in the civil practice is you're not working in survival mode anymore. You have time to sit down and spend a couple hours, days if you want, researching the law, researching what the case law is, drafting motions on behalf of your client. It's a more thorough representation than I was able to do at the public defender's office. It allowed my research and writing skills to grow, but because it's more thorough, the cases are dragged out for years sometimes. With the public defender's office, I could get a case and we could try it within 3 to 4 months if we needed to.
Is there a right to push a case to trial by a defendant if a defendant wants to do that?
Yes, they have a speedy trial right. They can file their speedy trial motion with the court. Normally attorneys don't like to file those because they want to feel more adequately prepared. But if a defendant feels like they want their speedy trial rights invoked or not violated, they will file a speedy trial. And then you have, I don't remember the timeline off the top of my head right now, but a certain amount of days before you try a case.
And did your clients invoke that very often?
I did not see it often. I sometimes would get cases that were right on the cusp of like the deadline for the speedy trial rights, or the speedy trial violation, excuse me, and usually a judge would find like, we can set this in a month and something wouldn't be violated. Yeah.
So tell us about judges. You don't have to get into too many specifics or by name, but are judges, do they differ?
Amongst each other?
Yes.
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yes, there's obviously certain judges that know more about criminal law. There's certain judges that know more about civil law. And then you get into the specifics. There's certain judges that are more prosecution friendly. There are some judges that are more defense friendly. And you know the reputation, the way people talk about the judges, you know pretty well, probably by the end of your first 2 weeks as a public defender, who's more friendly to the defense. It's all about that camaraderie in the public defender office, and you pick up on the talking, and you know which case is good and which case is bad, and when your client is put in front of a certain judge, you go ask, who is this judge? What are they like?
And they're acting in good faith.
Absolutely.
It's just they bring their own perspective
Yes.
to the bench,
Yes.
which is appropriate.
And something that actually really surprised me was any judges, for the most part, that came from a prosecution background, a lot of times were very defense friendly. And it was an interesting perspective on things.
Why would that be, do you
I'm
think?
not sure. And
Maybe they knew what was a good case and what was junk.
Yeah, probably. And so, yeah, it was just an interesting, you can't judge a book by its cover, is a good way to say it. You never know how a judge is going to rule.
Did any judges get angry at you because of your inexperience or become impatient?
I don't believe so.
Good.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think, I mean, for the most part, I'm pretty outspoken, probably a little too much. And I had no problem sitting with the judge and saying, Judge, I am new. I have no clue what I'm doing. Can you please give me another week? And they would smile and say, I remember being in your shoes.
A lot of judges were prosecutors, and a lot of judges were public defenders.
That's
I
right.
think.
Yeah. You know, when you work in the trenches for so long and make your career in the public service realm, whether it's a prosecutor or a defense attorney, it sounds like a pretty good gig to get up there and to actually make the decisions instead of just advocating for the decision. So,
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I think that's a good observation. Now, there came a time when you said, I've got to pay the groceries and the rent, my
Mhm.
car payment, my student loans. And so I take it in your current employment, without getting into specifics and
Sure.
invading your financial privacy, you're coping much better.
I am. I am coping much better. And you know, another aspect, there was quite a few aspects of leaving the public defender's office. When I originally started, I thought that this was going to be my forever career. Like Mary Fox said, it's not for everyone. It's financially exhausting, which also weighs on you emotionally. It's emotionally exhausting to carry around other people's, I don't want to say burdens, but you have sympathy and empathy for these human beings, and you have to carry that around and manage your own self-care. You also have a family to think about. You have friends to think about. It becomes a lot emotionally. Lastly, I'm aspiring, I would love to be a judge one day. And I didn't want to become a judge with just a public defender background. I wanted to become more well-rounded. I needed to figure out again how to research and write, since I didn't have much time to do that at the public defender's office. And I wanted to learn civil litigation intimidated me. I had no clue what people did in civil litigation.
Is it different?
It's completely different.
How so? You don't have the burden
I don't have the burden of,
as a public defender.
right, of trying to keep someone out of jail for the rest of their life. It's fighting more about money and financials. It's a longer, as I was saying before, a longer process that I can sit down and I can expand one folder into 3 boxes of documents and research and writing and motions and depositions, when as a public defender, you got a file and maybe the file grew to 2 small files, 3 small files, but it never became 3 boxes.
Do you tend to, as a public defender, to put cases in silos? This is a burglary 1st degree, this is a murder 1?
Yes.
And that helps, doesn't it?
Yes. And you kind of know after a while, not that every case is the same, but you know when you get a burglary, probation will be offered on this. This is probably going to plea. You get a robbery, probation is not going to be offered on this. This is probably going to be a trial. And so you kind of know where to prioritize and where to put more attention to. And I probably need to go do a scene investigation on that robbery as opposed to the burglary, because the evidence doesn't look so good for your client and they'll probably take the plea deal.
The public defender, when you were there, have the benefit of investigators?
Yes. We did have investigators on staff, but just like the attorneys, the investigators were also overworked. There was a certain system in place so that we weren't actually sending investigators out on small misdemeanor crimes or low-level felonies. They were there for the murders, the rapes, the robbery cases. Those are much more serious and it require a lot more investigating.
Did you ever have to go into neighborhoods to interview witnesses or look at scene of crimes where it was a bit worrisome?
All the time. All the time. The key is to go first thing in the morning.
Why is that?
Everyone's still sleeping. Especially when you're just there to take pictures. But I always felt good having an investigator with me. I never felt scared. And when you're there and you say that you're the public defender there, everyone is extremely friendly. No one is there to harm you.
And there's a lot of information to be found on your own, isn't there?
There is.
Are police reports 100% accurate?
Absolutely not. And it also depends on the case. The police will take a longer time on a more serious case, making a report, than they will on a less serious case. I mean, there's good police officers, there's bad police officers, but ultimately, I believe what I learned is what it came down to is a lot of the time police officers are overworked too. And their cases also blend together. And a lot of the times their report was done in haste because they were tired after a long shift. And so a lot of details are left out. Now that doesn't bode well for them when it comes time for trial. But in the moment, since I feel sympathy for all human beings, you have to feel a little sympathy for them too.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And they're there to serve and protect.
Absolutely.
So, what do you say to people who say, I don't see how Nina could represent anybody who she knows to be guilty?
Yeah.
How can you live with yourself
I-
under those circumstances?
That's actually been said to me more times than you would think. It's not about who's guilty and who's not guilty. It's about protecting rights that are given to us by the law. You are advocating for a human being, regardless of what they did, and they have certain rights under the law
And it's your job
to protect
to
those.
enforce those rights.
Yes, that's what it's about.
A prosecutor, I've heard, is supposed to search for the truth, find the truth,
Yes,
as opposed to being an advocate.
that's correct.
Whereas a criminal defense lawyer is all focused on the client.
Yes, that is correct.
And your job is to take advantage, fairly and in good faith, any defense that is available.
Exactly.
If somebody is dead to rights guilty of a robbery, does that not mean that there's an argument to be made about what the punishment should be? And you can advocate for the punishment.
Right, yeah. So even if you have a client who says, you know, I'm guilty of this, but I don't feel like I deserve jail time, can you go ask for probation? You go ask. If the prosecutor says no, you can do what's called an open plea and go to the judge and ask. Where it gets on, we put a little bit of the evidence on the record, we talk about the charges, the client can make a statement, and then you ultimately leave it up to the judge. And in the city, open pleas were very common.
What is a plea bargain? Tell me about that process.
So a plea bargain is when I guess in any case, guilty or not guilty, innocent or not, usually to avoid the cost, expense, and time of trial, a prosecutor or the defense can approach it as well and make the other side an offer for a plea. My client is willing to do 2 years probation, to go through drug rehabilitation in exchange for a guilty plea to this charge.
You're now handling civil cases. You
Yes.
handled criminal cases. Tell us the difference in burden of proof
Sure.
in those two cases, or types of cases.
Sure, so in criminal cases, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not beyond all doubt, but it's beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a pretty high standard. In in civil cases, it's not as high. It's escaping my mind. I keep wanting to say preponderance of the evidence. I kept wanting to say probable cause.
Those old things that are drilled into your head.
I know. Preponderance of the evidence, which is a much smaller burden.
Sometimes they say more than 50% or
Yes.
something like that.
51%. Yeah.
And in a criminal case, that's a pretty good defense to argue oftentimes, is it not?
It is, and I actually observed a lot of defense attorneys that talked a lot about reasonable doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt, what that means, their correlation of what it meant. I personally didn't spend as much time on that as some other attorneys did. But a lot of times in voir dire, that issue is definitely touched.
Does the public defender handle death penalty cases?
They do, but we have...
Which,
Yeah,
go
sorry,
ahead
we
and
have a
tell us.
specific office. We have a capital defense office that in the state of Missouri that handles those cases.
And those tend to be very, very experienced lawyers?
Yes. You do not get a capital defense position out of law school. You usually are in the public defender system for a long time before you apply and are accepted in that office.
Have you heard of a facility in the city of St. Louis called the Workhouse?
I have heard of the workhouse.
Have you ever been there?
I've been to the workhouse many times.
What is it?
It is a jail, a very old, rundown jail, in North City. It houses misdemeanor and low felony defendants.
And are people there waiting to go to trial too?
People are there waiting to go to trial. Some people are there after pleading guilty to a misdemeanor. They can be held at the workhouse for 1 year if that's what the sentence that was agreed to for a misdemeanor was.
Is it a happy and pleasant place to be?
It is not a happy and pleasant place to be. There's no air conditioning. Apparently there's a bug, rat, and snake infestation. I had clients who have told me they've been bitten by rats, that have seen cockroaches about this big running across their bed at night. I've had clients who have told me they have caught snakes this big that come through the windows. It's not a happy place to be. It sounds like a nightmare. I was only in the attorney allowed section, and I felt like the place was a nightmare in that section.
And I think it's in the process of perhaps being closed down.
I hope so.
Maybe.
I hope so.
I'm not sure about that.
That's been the goal for a few years now. I would hope that happens. Yeah.
Kevin, did you have any questions or comments that you wanted to address to Nina? You don't have to.
I just kept thinking of inappropriate questions about the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
and about funding, and who's up for election. You know, a lot of people ask me about judges, and
Sure.
when you go to vote, what do you do with judges? So,
Sure.
do you do research? What do they talk about in the middle of your careers?
I am actually a city resident,
Yeah.
and so because I worked as a public defender in the city, I know a lot of the city judges,
Mhm.
so I think I have a little bit of a different perspective on who I would vote to retain.
Okay.
But I obviously always think that, for the most part, judges are retained, no matter how you vote, unless there's an active movement to take them off the bench, and you would know about that. But I always think it's best to Google, look at your local Post-Dispatch, see what the opinions are of the judges. And if you've ever been in front of a judge and you've had a really bad experience, take that into consideration. You're the voter. Vote for what you believe.
People ask me that question all the time, and it's an excellent question. The Missouri Bar in the last, 5, 6, 10 years does a survey of the judges who are coming up for retention. And that can be very helpful. But it's very rare that the survey results in the bar recommending that a judge not be retained.
Yes.
And that is not because we're all trying to cozy up to judges. It just doesn't happen that often.
I believe it's happened one time since they started doing that.
I think
Yes.
so too. And everybody agreed that was entirely appropriate. I don't
And
know what that,
It was a movement to get the judge off the bench,
Right.
and everyone knew about it. Even if it happened in St. Louis County, and even if you were a city resident, you knew it was happening.
indeed.
Yeah.
But otherwise, they're retained.
Yeah.
And of course, in Missouri, we have the nonpartisan court plan, which is imperfect, but still a very good way to select judges. And we only use it in certain jurisdictions.
Yes.
The city, the county of St. Louis, and over in Jackson County, and maybe Greene County,
Right.
and Springfield, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it is a model
It is.
for selecting judges.
Yeah.
I hope you get that opportunity.
I hope I get that opportunity
Indeed,
too.
you would be wonderful.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else you wanted to add, Nina?
No, I don't. Do you have any other questions?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think everything went well, and I appreciate the gift of your time.
Thank you.
It's remarkable. Thank you for your service,
Of course.
and we're pleased that you could present all sorts of interesting things. This has been wonderful, and I'm
Thank
sure our viewers liked it a lot.
I hope so.
And before we turn the camera off, excuse me, I'll go off camera. Now, I presume you still have your public defender
I
mug.
do.
You need another one?
No, I would love it.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's that. Show that to the camera so they can see how nice it is.
So, it's the public defender. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. United States Constitution, 6th Amendment.
And then I'll give you another one if you want it. This has Nancy Pelosi's
Oh my gosh,
face on it.
I love this.
Uh,
I'm gonna take this to work.
What does it say? Does it say something?
Americans deserve a better tomorrow today. It's
Well,
true.
with people like you defending the indigent and the oppressed, Nina, we will have a better future.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very much.
Yeah, no, thank you.